It is December 1944. The end of World War II seems to be in sight. Allied commanders are confident that Nazi Germany is on its knees, gasping its final breath. But in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, a massive, silent beast is waking up. On December 16th, Adolf Hitler launches his last desperate gamble, Operation Watch on the Rhine. In total radio silence, over 200,000 German troops and nearly 1,000 tanks smash into the thinning American lines. It is a slaughter. The Americans are caught completely off guard. This is the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge. The weather is horrific. Thick fog and heavy snow ground the superior Allied Air Force, leaving American ground troops blind and battered. Panic begins to spread like a virus all the way to the top of the Allied command. The German panzers are cutting to the lines like a hot knife through butter, aiming to split the British and American armies in two and capture the vital port Antwerp. If they succeed, the war could drag on for years, or worse, end in a stalemate. The Allies need a miracle. They need a counterattack. But moving an army in sub-zero temperatures through snow-choked roads takes weeks, not days. Or so everyone thought. Everyone except for one man. By the morning of December 19th, the Allied command is staring into the abyss. The situation isn't just bad, it is catastrophic. The German war machine, which everyone assumed was broken and rusting, has roared back to life with ferocity that shakes the ground. In the center of the chaos lies the crossroads town of Bastogne. Inside the perimeter, the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, are completely cut off. They are surrounded by an ocean of German field gray. They are outnumbered, they are outgunned, and they are freezing to death in foxholes dug into the hard ice. They have no winter clothes, low ammunition, and the medical supplies are gone. If Bastogne falls, the entire road network opens up for the panzer divisions to race toward the sea. In this atmosphere of impending doom, Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower calls for an emergency summit. He chooses a location that reflects the grim reality of the moment. A bleak, drafty police barracks in Verdun, France. The conditions inside the meeting room are hardly better than the foxholes outside. The building is old and damp. The windows are rattled by the winter wind howling outside. The only source of heat is a small, struggling pot-bellied stove in the corner that provides almost no warmth against the biting chill. But the temperature in the room isn't just physical. It is psychological. The top brass of the Allied forces gather around a large wooden table. These are men who have sent thousands to their deaths, men of iron will, but today they look haunted. There is General Omar Bradley, the GI's general. Usually calm and steady, now looking pale, his face drawn with the weight of the men dying under his command. General Jacob Devers and Air Marshal Tedder sit in silence, chain smoking, their eyes scanning the large maps that show the German Bulge ripping a hole in their lines. The mood is funereal. They are whispering, fearing that this might be another Dunkirk, a total collapse of the Western Front. Then the door opens. General Dwight D. Eisenhower walks in. He takes one look at his subordinates, their slumped shoulders, their terrified eyes, and he knows that before he can win the battle on the ground, he has to win the battle in this room. He stiffens his back, flashes a look of absolute authority, and breaks the silence with a command that sounds almost insane given the circumstances. I want only cheerful faces at this conference. Ike booms, his voice cutting through the gloom. The present situation is to be regarded as an opportunity for us and not disaster. The generals look at him, stunned. Opportunity? The Germans are winning. But Eisenhower steps to the map. He points to the massive German wedge driving into their lines. He argues that by coming out of their fortified defenses, the Nazis have exposed themselves. They have stuck their head into a noose. Now, the Allies just have to pull the rope. But pulling that rope requires a maneuver that defies the laws of military physics. Eisenhower traces a line on the map. To stop the Germans, they cannot just hold the line. They must attack. They need to slam into the German southern flank, the soft underbelly of the beast. But there is a massive problem. The only force large enough, fast enough, and aggressive enough to make a difference is the U.S. Third Army. And the Third Army isn't here. They are heavily engaged in their own brutal fight, nearly 100 miles to the south in the Saar region. Eisenhower turns his gaze to the commander of the Third Army. He is the most controversial man in the European theater. A man who wears ivory-handled revolvers on his hips, who recites poetry and profanity in the same breath, and who believes he is the reincarnation of a Roman legionnaire, General George S. Patton. While the other generals look like they are at a funeral, Patton looks like he is at a feast. He hates defensive warfare. He wants to attack. Eisenhower looks Patton dead in the eye. The room goes quiet. The only sound is the crackling of the wood in the stove. Eisenhower knows what he is about to ask is unreasonable. It is a logistical nightmare. George, Eisenhower asks, his voice steady but heavy, how long will it take you to turn your army around and attack the German flank? The other generals hold their breath. They do the math in their heads. To disengage an army of hundreds of thousands of men from active combat is difficult enough. To then rotate that entire army 90 degrees, march them over icy, bomb-cratered roads in the middle of a blizzard, and launch a coordinated attack against a superior enemy. It is impossible. Standard military doctrine says this takes weeks. A fast army might do it in 10 days. Bradley looks at his boots. Tedder exhales a cloud of smoke. They wait for Patton to make excuses. They wait for him to ask for time. They wait for him to say that the snow is too deep or the fuel is too low. But Patton just stares back at Eisenhower, a glint in his eye. The tension in that freezing barracks is electric. The fate of the war hangs on the answer to this single question. When Eisenhower asks the question, the room seems to shrink. Everyone turns to General George S. Patton. They expect him to haggle. They expect him to demand more supplies, more air support, or more time. In modern warfare, moving an army is like moving a medium-sized city. You don't just snap your fingers and make it happen. Patton leans forward. He doesn't hesitate for a second. He looks Eisenhower dead in the eye and delivers the sentence that will become legend. I can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours. The reaction in the room is instantaneous. It isn't relief, it is shock, bordering on disbelief. The room goes silent, save for the wind rattling the window panes. You could hear a pin drop. General Bradley shifts uncomfortably in his chair, looking at his friend with concern. The other officers exchange glances that say, he's finally lost it. A British officer, Air Marshal Tedder, leans over to a colleague and whispers that Patton is talking absolute rot. To the men in that room, Patton sounds like a madman. To understand why this sounded so insane, you have to understand the logistics of 1944. An army isn't just men with rifles. It is thousands of tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, mobile hospitals, and kitchens. It is tons of gasoline, ammunition, and food. Imagine a freight train fully loaded, speeding south at 60 miles an hour. Now, imagine trying to stop that train instantly, pick it up off the tracks, turn it sideways, and get it running at full speed in a completely different direction, all while doing it in the middle of a blinding blizzard on icy roads in total darkness to avoid enemy bombers. It was a logistical impossibility. It defied the laws of physics and military science. Eisenhower, the pragmatist, tries to be the voice of reason. He needs a real plan, not bravado. He frowns and says, "Don't be fatuous, George. This is serious." Eisenhower assumes Patton is grandstanding, playing the part of the hero like he always does. He tells Patton to be realistic. He offers him more time. He says, "Take your time. Attack on December 22nd or 23rd. He wants a coordinated offensive, not a piecemeal suicide mission. But then the atmosphere in the room shifts. Patton reaches into his pocket, pulls out a cigar and lights it. Through the cloud of smoke, a sly smile spreads across his face. "I'm not being fatuous, Ike," Patton says calmly. "I've already issued the orders." The room freezes again. This wasn't bravado. It was a checkmate. How was this possible? The answer lay in the work of a man who wasn't even in the room, a man history often forgets. Days earlier, while other Allied commanders were celebrating, convinced the war was over and planning their Christmas dinners, Patton's intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, was not sleeping. Koch was a brilliant, obsessive workaholic who had noticed something everyone else missed. He saw that the Germans were maintaining radio silence. He saw the movement of elite panzer divisions disappearing from the map. While others saw the quiet as a sign of German defeat, Koch saw it for what it was, the calm before the storm. He warned Patton that a massive attack was coming. And unlike other generals who might have dismissed the bad news, Patton trusted his team implicitly. He didn't wait for permission from headquarters. On December 12th, for days before the Battle of the Bulge even began, Patton had secretly ordered his staff to draw up emergency contingency plans. He had his staff prepare 3 separate operational plans to turn the entire 3rd Army north at a moment's notice. They had already scouted the roads. They had already calculated the fuel consumption. They had already mapped out the terrain. So, when Eisenhower called that meeting in Verdun, Patton wasn't guessing. He knew exactly what he could do because he had already started doing it. Before stepping into that freezing conference room, Patton had stopped at a telephone. He called his chief of staff and uttered a simple code word. That single word set the machine in motion. While the generals were arguing in Verdun, the Third Army was already disengaging from the enemy in the south. The tanks were already turning their turrets. The trucks were already rolling onto the icy roads. Patton looked around the table at the stunned faces of his superiors. He wasn't promising a miracle. He was delivering a fait accompli. The Third Army wasn't waiting for orders. They were already coming. What followed the meeting in Verdun was not just a military maneuver. It was one of the greatest logistical feats in the history of warfare. It was a movement so complex and so rapid that German intelligence refused to believe it was happening until the first American tank shells started raining down on them. In less than 48 hours, Patton had performed a magic trick. He had to disengage 250,000 men who were currently locked in heavy combat in the Saar region. To pull a soldier out of a firefight, turn him around, and march him north without the enemy realizing the line was empty is incredibly dangerous. If the Germans had noticed a withdrawal, they could have overrun the rear guard. But the withdrawal was executed with surgical precision. Then came the drive. Patton moved 133,000 vehicles, tanks, half-tracks, supply trucks, and jeeps over icy, single-lane country roads. And he did it in total darkness. Because the German Luftwaffe was prowling the skies, the drivers couldn't use their headlights. They had to drive using cat eyes, tiny slits of light that barely illuminated the bumper of the truck in front of them. It was a symphony of controlled chaos. The roads were sheets of glass. One wrong move meant a tank sliding into a ditch and blocking the entire column for hours. To keep the army moving, the military police became the unsung heroes of the operation, standing at frozen crossroads in the middle of nowhere, shivering in sub-zero winds. They waved 40-ton tanks through like traffic cops in Times Square during rush hour. They stood there for 12, 16 hours at a time, their hands freezing to their batons, ensuring the flow of steel never stopped. Inside the trucks, the men were exhausted. They were frostbitten, hungry, and terrified. They had been fighting for months, and now they were being rushed into the worst battle of the war. They grumbled about old blood and guts, cursing Patton for his ruthlessness. They said, Patton wants glory, and he's going to use our frozen bodies to get it. But despite the complaints, they moved. They moved because they knew the stakes, and they moved because Patton demanded it. But even the most aggressive general in American history had met an enemy he couldn't shoot, shell, or outmaneuver: the weather. The snow was relentless. Thick, suffocating fog blanketed the Ardennes, grounding the superior Allied Air Force. Without air support, Patton's tanks were blind, and the trapped soldiers in Bastogne were sitting ducks. Patton, growing increasingly frustrated, did something that had become a part of military legend. Though known for his foul mouth and violent temper, Patton was a deeply religious man. On the morning of December 22nd, he summoned his chaplain, Colonel James O'Neill, to his headquarters. Patton looked at the chaplain and asked, "Chaplain, I want you to publish a prayer for good weather. I'm tired of these soldiers having to fight mud and floods as well as Germans. See if we can't get God to work on our side." The chaplain was stunned. He asked, "Sir, isn't that a bit unusual?" Patton barked back, "Hell no. We're going to kill Germans, aren't we?" The chaplain went to work and typed up a prayer on a small index card to be distributed to every man in the Third Army. It read, Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech thee, of thy great goodness, to restrain these immoderate rains with which we have had to contend. Grant us fair weather for battle, was crush the oppression and wickedness of our enemies, and establish thy justice among men and nations. Patton ordered 250,000 copies printed immediately. He told his staff he was going to get in good with the Lord. Whether it was divine intervention, the power of prayer, or just meteorological luck, something shifted. On the morning of December 23rd, the miracle happened. The heavy gray curtain that had choked the battlefield for weeks suddenly tore open. The sun came out. It was a brilliant, blindingly bright winter day. The snow sparkled under a clear blue sky. A roar filled the air, not of tanks, but of engines from above. Thunderbolts, typhoons, and Mustangs of the Allied air forces swarmed the sky like angry hornets. For the first time in the battle, they could see their targets. They dropped bombs on German supply columns, strafed Panzer divisions, and dropped desperate supplies to the starving men in Bastogne. On the ground, the morale of the Third Army soared. The impossible promise had been kept. The weather had broken, and with the sun at their backs, Patton's forces slammed into the German flank with the force of a sledgehammer, driving the wedge that would eventually break the back of Hitler's last offensive. While Patton's tanks were tearing up the roads to get to them, the situation inside the town of Bastogne had passed the point of desperation. The 101st Airborne Division, the battered bastards of Bastogne, were holding a perimeter that looked less like a military line and more like a jagged scar in the snow. The Germans knew the Americans were suffering. On December 22nd, 4 German soldiers approached the American lines under a white flag. They carried a typed letter from the German commander. It was an ultimatum. The message was simple. The Americans were surrounded. There was no hope of rescue. To save themselves from total annihilation, they must surrender within 2 hours. The American commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, read the note. He laughed and said, "A surrender? Nuts." When it came time to draft the official reply, McAuliffe didn't write a diplomatic letter. He typed a single word, sent it on the page. Nuts! When the German officers received the reply, they were confused. They asked, "Is that negative or affirmative?" The American colonel handing them the note replied, "It means go to hell." That defiance became legendary, but defiance doesn't stop bullets. By December 26th, the Germans were furious. They hammered the town with artillery and airstrikes. The paratroopers were counting their individual bullets. They were scavenging food from frozen fields. They were listening for the sound of friendly engines, but all they heard was the grinding of German tracks tightening the noose. But then, late in the afternoon on the day after Christmas, the ground began to shake. To the south, the lead elements of Patton's 4th Armored Division were pushing hard. Leading the charge was a Sherman jumbo tank named Cobra King, commanded by Lieutenant Charles Boggess. They knew the 101st was dying. They didn't stop for anything. They smashed through the German roadblocks, their guns blazing, driving straight into the heart of the enemy lines. At 4:50 p.m., just as the winter twilight was fading into darkness, the men in the foxholes at Bastogne looked up. They saw a shape emerging from the tree line. It was a tank, but was it friend or foe? Then they saw the white star painted on the side. Lieutenant Boggess popped the hatch of Cobra King and called out to the weary paratroopers. The siege was broken. The impossible promise that Patton had made in that freezing barracks in Verdun, the promise that the British called absolute rot, had been kept. He had arrived exactly when he said he would. The relief of Bastogne didn't end the war, but it broke the back of the German offensive. The German army had gambled everything on a quick victory. They had used their last reserves of fuel, their best tanks, and their most elite soldiers. By stopping them at Bastogne and slamming into their flank, Patton drained the life out of the German war machine. The Battle of the Bulge would rage on into January, claiming thousands more lives. But the strategic initiative was lost for Hitler. He had thrown his last dice, and thanks to the speed of the Third Army, he had rolled snake eyes. This victory wasn't just about tanks and guns. It was a victory of mindset. Most generals in World War II, and indeed in history, fight the battle that is right in front of them. They react to the enemy. They wait for orders. They wait for supplies. George S. Patton fought the battle that was coming. His genius wasn't just in his aggressive tactics. It was in his foresight. While others were celebrating Christmas early, Patton was preparing for a disaster. While others argued about whether a movement was possible, Patton was already moving. His ability to foresee the danger, combined with the sheer force of will to make an entire army do the impossible, saved the 101st Airborne from annihilation, and likely shortened the war by months. It serves as a timeless reminder that in the chaos of life and war, hope is not a strategy. When the odds are overwhelming and the world is freezing over, preparation and decisive action are the only things that matter. The story of the Battle of the Bulge is filled with thousands of individual acts of heroism, from the foxholes of Bastogne to the tank commanders of the Third Army. But what do you think was the turning point? Was it McAuliffe's nuts, or was it Patton's logistical miracle? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to The Last Offensive. We release new stories of courage and conflict every day. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next battlefield.